The phone rang at 10:47 p.m., exactly the same time it had rung every night for the last 3 months. "Hey, Mom," my son's familiar voice said, low and warm, always beginning the same way. "You home? You alone?" It had become a ritual, almost comforting, like a bedtime story for adults. Sometimes we talked about his new job, sometimes about my garden, sometimes about nothing at all. But he always asked that question first, as if it were part of a secret code between us. "Yes, honey," I would always answer, smiling even though he couldn't see me. "Just me and the TV." Last night, for the first time, I lied. And that small lie saved my life. 3 years earlier, after my husband passed away, Daniel had begged me to move closer to the city where he lived. I refused. I loved my little house on the hill, the one with the creaky porch, the view of the pines, and the echo of every memory we'd built there. Solitude never scared me, at least not until the phone calls began. At first, they seemed harmless. A single ring after midnight, silence on the line. Then, the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, the kind that crawls under your skin. I told Daniel, but he brushed it off. "Probably a wrong number, Mom, don't worry. But mothers know when something isn't random." I started locking the doors earlier, double-checking the windows, keeping a flashlight next to my bed. Then Daniel started calling nightly. "You're locking up, right? You're not leaving the lights off?" He sounded tense, more protective than usual. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" I'd asked once. He paused. "Nothing, I read something in the paper. It's fine." He never told me what it was. Last night began like any other. The wind outside carried that October chill that seeps into old houses. I'd made tea, put on my thick robe, and settled into the couch with an old movie humming softly. The phone buzzed. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, Danny. You all right?" "Yeah," he said after a pause. "You alone?" That question again. But this time, something in his tone changed. It wasn't casual. It was tight, like he was holding his breath. My heart gave a small flutter. "Of course, honey." "Just me." Except it wasn't. Unbeknownst to him, my neighbor Karen had come by earlier. Her husband was away, and she'd wanted to borrow my old recipe book. When she saw how late it was getting, I insisted she stay the night. She was already dozing off in the guest room when Daniel called. "I'm glad," he said finally. "Keep the lights on tonight, okay?" "Promise me." "I promise." After we hung up, I went to check the locks again. Every bolt clicked perfectly into place. I smiled to myself. Daniel worried too much. Then the power went out. The entire house sank into darkness, so complete it felt alive. My heart jumped. The hum of the refrigerator died. The heater stopped. The silence thickened. "Karen?" I called. A faint voice answered from the guest room. "Probably a blown fuse, Margaret." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. My fingers trembled as I reached for the flashlight on the table. A circle of pale light flickered to life. I aimed it toward the kitchen and froze. The back door was open. I was sure I had locked it. A cold gust swept in from the woods, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine needles. My first instinct was to call Daniel. My second was to close that door before Karen woke up and panicked. But before I could move, I heard it, the faintest creak from the hallway. Someone was inside. I turned off the flashlight and held my breath. Every instinct screamed to hide, to run, but I forced myself to stay still and listen. There it was again, slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the living room floor. I felt for my phone in the dark and called Daniel. He picked up on the first ring. "Mom?" My voice came out in a whisper. "Danny, there's someone here." For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then a low, steady voice. "Go to your room." "Lock the door." "Don't make a sound." I started to move. But then I remembered Karen. She was still asleep in the guest room, directly across the hall. "Danny, my neighbor's here." "Mom." "Listen to me," he interrupted. "Urgent now. Get inside your room, lock it, and stay low. I'm calling the sheriff right now. Do not hang up." I tiptoed down the hallway, the phone clutched so tight my knuckles ached. The creaking stopped for a second. Whoever was inside must have heard me. I reached my bedroom, pushed the door shut, and turned the lock. My breath came in shaky bursts. Then the sound of soft footsteps outside the door. They stopped. The doorknob twisted slowly. "Danny," I whispered. Barely breathing, I hear it, he said through the phone. Stay still. The police are 5 minutes away. The knob rattled again, harder this time. A man's voice, low and rasping, came through the crack. I know you're in there, Margaret. Open the door. My stomach turned to ice. How did he know my name? Mom, Daniel said sharply. He's been following widows in your area. He targets women who live alone. That's why I kept calling. I didn't want to scare you. He'd known all along. The knob stopped turning. The footsteps retreated, slow, careful. Then came a sound from the kitchen. Drawers opening, glass breaking. Karen screamed. I covered my mouth to keep from crying out. He's with her, I whispered. Stay locked in, Daniel ordered. Help is almost there. The next 30 seconds felt like eternity. I heard Karen's voice pleading, then a crash, then silence. My legs gave out and I sank to the floor, the phone shaking in my hands. Mom, Daniel yelled through the line. Before I could answer, red and blue lights flashed through the window. A loud command echoed from outside. Sheriff's Department! Come out with your hands up! There was a scuffle, shouts, the slam of boots against wood, and then nothing. Finally, a knock on my door. Ma'am, it's safe now. I opened it slowly. 2 officers stood there. Behind them, in the hallway, lay a man in dark clothes, face down, hands cuffed behind his back. Is that? I started. The officer nodded. We've been after him for weeks. You're lucky, ma'am. If someone else had been here tonight, my knees buckled and I clutched the door frame for support. Karen was safe, just shaken. She kept whispering, he was in the kitchen. He looked right at me. Daniel's voice came through the phone, breaking with emotion. You lied, didn't you, Mom? When I asked if you were alone? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Yes, for once I lied, he exhaled shakily. That lie saved you, Mom. It saved you. The house looked smaller under the flashing red and blue lights, like it was curling in on itself after what had happened. A young deputy guided me to a chair in the living room, while other officers photographed the kitchen, the broken glass, the overturned drawer. Karen sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, trembling. I could still smell the smoke from the sheriff's flashlight batteries, mixed with the sharp tang of fear. Ma'am, you're safe now, one of the officers said, crouching beside me. Do you know this man? I shook my head. No, never seen him before in my life. He nodded and scribbled something in his notebook. He had a list with names and addresses. Yours was on it. The words made my blood run cold. A list? Yes, ma'am. Looks like he's been tracking widows across 3 counties. Found newspaper clippings in his truck. I glanced toward the hallway where 2 more deputies were leading the man out in cuffs. His face was pale, eyes unfocused, like he wasn't fully there. When he passed me, he gave a slow grin, a horrible, crooked smile that sent a chill down my spine. Don't look at him, Karen whispered, clutching her blanket tighter. The officer patted my shoulder. We'll take him in. You'll get a call tomorrow for a statement. Do you have family nearby? Yes, I said softly, my throat tight. My son's driving in from the city. When they finally left, the house fell silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not peaceful, not empty, but hollow, like the air itself didn't know how to breathe. I looked around at the broken kitchen window, the shards glinting on the floor, and the phone on the table still glowing faintly with Daniel's name. I pressed the call button. He answered instantly. Mom, are you okay? I'm halfway there. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, my voice shaking. Just hurry, I will. Don't touch anything. The police said the guy's been posing as a handyman. He used to leave fake flyers in mailboxes. You probably saw one. I suddenly remembered the folded paper I'd tossed in the trash a few days ago. Local fix-it services, free inspection for senior homes. My stomach twisted. Danny, I whispered. He could have been here before. It was 3:00 a.m. when Daniel's car lights cut through the mist outside. The moment he stepped out, I felt the weight I'd been carrying crumble. He ran straight to me and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. He smelled like rain and exhaustion, but also like safety, the kind I hadn't felt in years. You scared me to death, he murmured into my hair. I told you to keep the doors locked, Mom. I did. I swear I did. He must have picked it. Daniel looked around at the wrecked kitchen, his jaw tightening. I should have told you everything earlier. He'd already attacked 2 women in Pine Hill. I touched his arm. You were protecting me, Danny. I know. He sighed and sat beside me. For a few minutes, we didn't speak. Outside, the deputy's taillights disappeared into the trees, leaving us in a fragile quiet. "Do you remember Dad fixing that window during a storm?" I said suddenly, staring at the shards. "He said every broken thing just needed a bit of patience." Daniel smiled weakly. He was right. "We'll fix this too." Morning crept in slow and gray. Karen left early, still shaken but grateful to be alive. I made coffee, my hands trembling so much I spilled half the grounds on the counter. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. "The sheriff called," he said quietly. "They found more names in his car. One of them's just 5 miles from here." I felt a shiver run down my back. "Another widow?" He nodded. "Yeah, she didn't make it," the coffee pot hissed, a dark, bitter smell filling the kitchen. I turned it off quickly and sat across from him. "Danny, why did he pick me?" I asked. He looked up, eyes tired but gentle. "Because you live alone. Because you're kind. Because monsters look for light, Mom. They want to snuff it out." I swallowed hard. But I lied. "If I hadn't said Karen was here, you didn't even know she'd save you," he said, half smiling. "That's the irony. You were protecting her by letting her stay, and she ended up protecting you." He reached over and squeezed my hand. "You did everything right." That afternoon, the sheriff stopped by again. He handed Daniel a folder. "We got his statement. Says he'd been watching your house for weeks. Said you looked peaceful." The officer's mouth tightened in disgust. Sick mind, I couldn't listen anymore. I went out to the porch where the sun had started breaking through the fog. The pines looked the same as they always had, tall, quiet, unbothered by human chaos. But to me, they felt different now. The air felt heavier. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, and heard Daniel's footsteps behind me. "You know what's strange?" he said. "He only broke in because the lights went out. If the power hadn't failed, maybe he would have kept watching, waiting. I can't live in fear forever, Danny." He smiled faintly. "Then don't. Live smart instead. I'm getting you a full security system. Cameras, sensors, everything. You'll be able to see the yard from your phone." I laughed softly. And here I thought I'd never learn to use those gadgets. "I'll teach you." That night, when Daniel finally went to sleep on the couch, I stood by the window watching the dark woods. The moonlight spilled across the yard where the police cars had been. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, the fine lines deeper, the eyes more tired, but also sharper, wiser. I thought about the phone call again, the question he always asked. "Are you alone?" I used to think it was a silly question. Now I understood it wasn't about company. It was about safety, about being seen. At 10:47 p.m., my phone buzzed again. My heart leapt, but the screen only showed an unknown number. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I remembered what the sheriff said. The man was in custody. It couldn't be him. Still, I let it ring. After the 5th buzz, it stopped. Silence settled over the house. I whispered to myself, "I'm not alone anymore." From the couch, Daniel stirred and muttered, half asleep, "You okay, Mom?" "Yes, honey," I whispered back, smiling through the darkness. "Just me and the TV." But in my heart, I knew that was another lie, one I was finally grateful to tell. The following morning began with the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, just heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I woke up before Daniel, careful not to wake him on the couch. He looked exhausted, still in his jeans, one arm draped over his face to block the light. I brewed coffee and stepped onto the porch. The world looked normal again. Birds on the fence, mist lifting off the lawn, sunlight breaking through the trees. Yet every shadow felt sharper, every creak of wood made my pulse quicken. I kept seeing the man's face, that crooked smile as they led him away. I was halfway through my coffee when Daniel's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced inside. It was a message from the sheriff. "Call me when you wake." Found something strange in his files. When Daniel finally stirred, I handed him the phone. His brow furrowed as he read the text. "I'll call him now," he said, rubbing his eyes. I watched him pace the kitchen, voice low, every few seconds his expression darkening. Finally, he hung up and sat down across from me, his jaw tense. "Mom," he said slowly, "it's not random. The man, his name's Reed Harper, kept detailed logs of everyone he watched. He wasn't breaking into houses for money. He was collecting something. I frowned. Collecting? Names, dates, notes about their routines. Like a hunter tracking patterns. And here's the worst part. His notes on you go back 6 months. I felt the blood drain from my face. 6 months? Daniel nodded. Remember that time you told me someone knocked and ran? You thought it was kids playing around? I nodded weakly. That was probably him. He was testing how long it took you to answer. My hands trembled around the coffee mug. Why me? Daniel hesitated.
There's a pattern.
All the women he watched were widows who lived alone. All within 30 miles of his last job. His job? He used to do maintenance at a nursing home. Got fired after one of the patients went missing. I covered my mouth, a sharp gasp escaping. Oh God. Daniel reached over and took my hand. He's behind bars now. But the sheriff said there might have been someone helping him. The handwriting on some of the notes doesn't match. That single word, helping, sent another chill through me. Later that afternoon, we decided to clean up the house together. The police had taken what they needed, but shards of glass and debris still littered the floor. Daniel swept while I carefully picked up fallen picture frames. One of them, my favorite photo of Daniel and his father at the lake, had cracked right across Ethan's smile. I traced the line with my finger, the glass cool beneath my skin. He used to say you can tell a person's soul by the way they look at their family, I murmured. Daniel smiled faintly. He said the same thing to me. We worked in silence after that, each lost in our own thoughts. When the sun dipped below the trees, I started dinner, chicken stew, the kind Daniel loved as a kid. For the first time in days, the smell of food felt comforting. While the stew simmered, Daniel stepped outside to check the new security sensors he'd installed. I stood by the window, watching him, thinking how he'd grown into his father's steadiness. But then something caught my eye, movement across the road near the edge of the woods, a shadow. It disappeared just as quickly, but it was enough to make my heart jump. I called out, "Daniel!" He came running back inside. "What is it?" I saw someone near the trees. He peered through the curtains, scanning the yard. "Could have been a deer, Mom. You're jumpy." "Maybe," I said quietly. But deep down, I wasn't sure. That night, Daniel slept upstairs. He insisted it would make me feel safer if he was closer to the window facing the woods. I sat on the couch with the TV low, pretending to watch an old movie. But my eyes kept flicking to the window. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., the house phone rang. It was so sudden that I nearly dropped my teacup. No one called the landline anymore. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello?" For a moment, nothing but static. Then a faint male voice. "You shouldn't have lied." My heart slammed in my chest. "Who is this?" More static. Then the same voice again, slower this time. "You shouldn't have lied." Last night, I slammed the receiver down, my hands shaking. My throat went dry. The police said he was in custody. How could he call me? I ran upstairs and shook Daniel awake. He sat up instantly. "What's wrong?" "Someone just called. He said I shouldn't have lied." Daniel grabbed his phone and called the sheriff. They confirmed Reed was still in county jail. "He doesn't have phone access," the officer said. "But we'll check the logs." Daniel hung up and rubbed his forehead. It could be a prank. Someone saw the news and decided to be funny. But the tremor in his voice told me he didn't believe that either. The next morning, we went through every inch of the house again. Windows, locks, doors. Nothing seemed disturbed. But as Daniel was checking the back porch, he found something taped under the railing. A small black device with a blinking light. He cursed softly. "It's a recorder. Someone's been listening." My knees went weak. "How long?" "No way to tell. But this isn't cheap. Whoever planted it knew what they were doing." He called the sheriff immediately. Within an hour, an officer was there collecting it. They promised to send it to forensics. As soon as the police left, I collapsed onto the couch, tears finally spilling down my face. "I can't live like this, Danny. Every time I close my eyes, I see that man's face." He knelt beside me, his hand steady on mine. "You won't have to, Mom. I'm moving back in for a while." I shook my head. "You have your job, your life. You are my life," he said firmly. "If I hadn't called you that night, His voice broke and he looked away. "I can't take that chance again." I touched his cheek. "Then we'll face it together." That night, Daniel set up motion lights around the yard and checked the locks one last time before bed. I sat in the darkened living room, watching the soft glow from the porch spill across the floor. The phone rang again. My heart lurched. But this time I answered on speaker with Daniel standing beside me. "Hello?" he said sharply, static. Then a distorted voice, almost mechanical. "You lied to him. And now he's coming for you." Daniel's eyes widened. He traced the call on his phone. Unknown number, no location. The voice continued, whispering, "Check the attic." Then the line went dead. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Daniel grabbed a flashlight and motioned for me to stay behind him. The ladder to the attic creaked as he pulled it down. The air up there was cold, musty. I followed him halfway, unable to stay downstairs alone. Dust swirled in the flashlight beam as he scanned the rafters, and then he froze. There, wedged behind an old suitcase, was a camera, small, black, and still recording. Daniel slowly reached toward the small black camera, his hands steady but his breathing shallow. He unplugged it carefully and turned it over. The red light flickered once, then went dead. "It's still warm," he whispered. "Someone's been watching us recently." I felt my knees weaken. "How recently?" He pointed to the tiny timestamp display still faintly glowing on the side. "It's been recording for the last 6 hours. That means someone came here after we locked everything last night." The air felt heavy. I pressed my hand over my chest, trying to steady my breathing as Daniel climbed down with the camera. "We need to take this to the sheriff immediately," he said. I nodded, grabbing my sweater, but as we headed for the car, something caught my eye at the edge of the porch. A small folded note wedged between the steps. It looked fresh, like it had been placed there recently. My trembling fingers opened it, 3 words, scrawled in uneven handwriting. "He isn't alone." I stared at the paper, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Daniel," I whispered, showing him the note. He scanned it, jaw tightening. "Get in the car, Mom! Now!" We drove straight to the sheriff's office, the road stretching endlessly under the morning fog. I couldn't stop replaying the phrase in my mind. "He isn't alone. Sheriff Burns met us outside." His face was serious as Daniel handed over the camera and note. "We'll send this straight to forensics," the sheriff said. "But I'll tell you right now, this is organized. Reed Harper may have been just one part of something bigger." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "You mean there are more of them?" Burns sighed. "We've seen this before. Small groups who track vulnerable people, widows, the elderly, the isolated. Sometimes it's for burglary, sometimes it's darker." Daniel clenched his fists. "Then we need protection. Tonight." The sheriff nodded. "I'll have a patrol car circle your property every hour. Don't answer the door for anyone." We returned home silent. The familiar creak of the front gate, the sight of the porch. Everything felt tainted now. The safety of home was gone. That evening, Daniel set up new locks and tested the alarms twice. I made dinner, though neither of us had an appetite. I pushed food around my plate, my thoughts swirling. "Danny," I said finally, my voice soft, "do you think he's been watching me all this time?" "Since your father passed?" He looked up, pain flashing in his eyes. "Maybe, but not anymore. We're going to end this." After dinner, he went outside to check the security lights one last time. I started washing dishes, my hands working mechanically. The steady rhythm of water hitting the sink almost soothed me, until the lights flickered, just for a second, then again. "Daniel?" I called out. No answer. I wiped my hands and stepped toward the back door. The yard was empty. The motion lights were still glowing, but Daniel wasn't there. Panic clawed up my throat. Then I heard his voice from the front porch. "Mom, come here." I hurried out and froze. On the porch railing sat a single white daisy, its petals perfectly arranged. A small card dangled from the stem, still not alone. Daniel looked at me, his face pale. "He's taunting us." Before I could respond, the patrol car pulled up. Sheriff Burns stepped out, flashlight in hand. He examined the daisy, his expression grim. "Fresh cut," he muttered. "Whoever left this did it within the last hour." I wrapped my arms around myself, shaking. "But how? We were inside the whole time." Burns turned toward the road. "They're watching from somewhere close. Maybe the woods." Daniel looked toward the trees that bordered our property. Then let's find them. The sheriff raised a hand. No, you stay inside. I'll send 2 deputies to sweep the area. They disappeared into the woods with flashlights, beams slicing through the darkness. Daniel and I stood together waiting. Every minute felt like an hour, then a radio crackled in the distance. We found something, a deputy said. Burns motioned for us to stay put and jogged toward the sound. A few minutes later, he returned, holding a small box wrapped in black cloth. It was buried near the fence line. What's inside? Daniel asked. The sheriff unwrapped it. Inside was an old-fashioned cassette recorder and a stack of Polaroid photos. He clicked the recorder on. The faint hiss of static filled the air, and then a voice, low and calm. She lied again. She said she was alone, but I know she's not. I can see him. My hand flew to my mouth. That voice. I knew that voice. Sheriff, I whispered. That's not Reed. Daniel frowned. Then who? Before I could answer. I heard it again, faintly, this time not from the recorder, but from the trees, that same voice echoing softly through the night. You shouldn't have lied. Daniel pushed me behind him. Scanning the dark woods with his flashlight, Sheriff Burns barked an order into his radio, and within moments, beams of light swept through the trees. The sound of snapping branches echoed as the deputies fanned out. Then, silence. A minute passed. Then 2. Finally, the radio crackled again. We've got someone! Moving in! Burns sprinted toward the sound, Daniel close behind him. I waited on the porch, frozen, the night air biting at my skin. After what felt like forever, they returned, dragging a man in handcuffs. He was taller than Reed, leaner, with pale eyes that glinted under the porch light. Who is he? I whispered. The sheriff's expression was grim. Name's Walter Finch. Used to work with Reed at that nursing home. They were partners. My stomach turned. Partners. Doing what? Burns hesitated, taking advantage of elderly patients, using hidden cameras to record them. When Reed got fired, Walter disappeared. Looks like he kept the tapes, and his obsession alive. Walter looked at me then, his lips curling into a thin smile. You lied, he whispered. That's why he came first. I stepped back, my body trembling. Daniel shouted, Don't talk to her! But Walter just laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. They took him away, and the deputies stayed to secure the area. Daniel locked every door, every window, triple-checking each one before sitting down beside me. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The silence was finally peaceful, but only on the surface. I knew it wasn't over, because Walter's last words echoed in my mind. That's why he came first. He. Who was he? The next morning, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows, soft, rhythmic, deceptive in its calm. Daniel had stayed the night, sleeping in the armchair near the front door, his head resting against his crossed arms. I brewed 2 cups of coffee, letting the aroma fill the silence. When I handed him one, he blinked awake, the lines of exhaustion deep under his eyes. You didn't sleep at all, did you? I asked. He shook his head. Didn't want to. Before I could answer, headlights flashed through the window. A familiar sheriff's car pulled up, tires crunching against the wet gravel. Sheriff Burns stepped out, hat pulled low against the drizzle. The expression on his face told me what I feared. There was more. Morning, he said quietly as Daniel opened the door. We've been questioning Walter all night. Daniel crossed his arms. And? Burns sighed, wiping the rain from his brow. He's not the only one involved. There's a third man, and according to Walter, he's the one who started it all. The one who picked the victims, chose who they'd watch. I felt my stomach drop. Who? Burns hesitated, then met my eyes. He wouldn't give a name, but he said you'd recognize it if you heard it. The words sent a cold wave through me. Recognize it? I whispered. What does that mean? Burns shook his head. We're still digging. Walter claims it started at the nursing home where he and Reed worked, right after your husband, Thomas, passed away. The mention of my late husband's name made me flinch. What does my husband have to do with any of this? Burns looked uneasy. Walter said your husband was the one who first gave them access, not knowing what they were really doing. He was head of maintenance at the facility, right? Yes, I said slowly. He fixed the cameras, the security systems. According to Walter, Burns continued, Thomas gave them clearance to install surveillance equipment in several rooms. They told him it was for safety monitoring. But once he found out what they were actually doing, filming patients, he confronted Reed and Walter. Daniel's voice was sharp. "And they killed him?" Burns hesitated, his silence an answer in itself. I gripped the edge of the table, my breath trembling. "No, the police said it was a heart attack." Burns nodded softly. "That's what Reed told us back then. But Walter says Thomas had a recording. He caught everything, the proof of what they were doing. And that recording was never found." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You think this third man wants it?" Burns nodded. "Walter said the leader believed Thomas hid the recording before he died, and that you might have it now." My knees went weak, and Daniel grabbed my arm. "Mom, sit down!" I sank into the chair, heart pounding. "So all this time, they weren't just watching me. They were looking for something." Burns nodded grimly. "And they still haven't found it." After the sheriff left, Daniel and I sat in silence for a long time. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming on the roof like a warning. I looked at the framed photo of Thomas on the mantel, his easy smile, his hand resting on my shoulder. For years I'd thought of him as a quiet, kind man who fixed things. But now, another image was forming. A man who had discovered something terrible, who died trying to protect me. "Danny," I said softly, "if there really is a recording, where could it be?" He rubbed his temples. Did Dad have any secret places? Somewhere he kept personal stuff? I thought back. The garage, the old attic, his tool shed, but nothing stood out. Then a memory surfaced, small, almost forgotten. "Wait," I said. "A week before he died, he told me he'd fix something in the basement. But when I went down later, there was nothing broken." Daniel was already on his feet. "Let's go." The basement smelled faintly of earth and dust. The single light bulb buzzed dimly overhead. Daniel ran his hand along the old shelves and toolboxes, searching for anything out of place. "Look for anything that doesn't belong," he said. I nodded, scanning the cluttered shelves. Jars of nails, old paint cans, boxes of holiday decorations. My hand brushed against one box tucked deep behind the others, covered in cobwebs. The word plumbing was scrawled across it in faded marker. "Danny," I whispered, "this one's heavier." He took it from me, setting it on the workbench. When he opened it, inside wasn't plumbing equipment. It was an old tape recorder, the same model I remembered Thomas using when he documented repair notes for the nursing home. Next to it lay a single cassette labeled in his handwriting, "June 8th, Hallway B." Daniel's eyes widened. That's the day before he died. He plugged the recorder into an outlet and hit play. At first, static. Then Thomas's voice, shaky but determined. "If anyone finds this, it means they know. Reed and Walter, they're not working alone. Someone higher is paying them. I think it's a resident's son, someone with power. I've already told the administrator. If anything happens to me, make sure my wife knows. Tell her to check the light." The tape clicked off. Daniel frowned. "What light?" I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The hallway light. That's what he fixed that day. We ran upstairs to the old hallway by the laundry room. There, above the door, hung a dusty light fixture that hadn't worked in years. Daniel climbed onto a chair and unscrewed the glass cover. Inside, taped to the metal frame, was a small plastic pouch. He pulled it down carefully, his hands trembling. Inside was a tiny SD card. "This must be it," he whispered. But before we could speak another word, a loud bang echoed from the front of the house. We froze. Daniel whispered, "Stay here," and grabbed a metal wrench from the counter. I clutched the SD card and followed him down the hallway. Through the front window, I saw a car idling at the curb, black, sleek, unfamiliar. The rain poured harder now, masking the sound of the engine. Daniel whispered, "Get back!" Then came another sound. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. I grabbed my phone to call the sheriff, but there was no signal. Static hissed in my ear. "No, no, no," I whispered. Daniel motioned for me to move toward the back door, but before we could, the doorknob started to turn. The doorknob twisted again, this time harder. Rainwater dripped from the porch roof, each drop hitting the steps like a countdown. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear Daniel whisper, "Mom, go. Back door now." But before I could move, the front door burst open. A tall man stepped inside, soaked to the bone, wearing a dark raincoat. His presence filled the doorway like a shadow that had finally found its shape. His eyes were pale gray, cold and sharp. He smiled faintly when he saw me. "Well," he said calmly, his voice gravelly. "You've been busy, Margaret." I froze. "My name." He knew my name. Daniel stepped in front of me, wrench raised. "Who the hell are you?" The man's gaze flicked toward Daniel, unimpressed. "I'm someone your father owed answers to," he said quietly. "Thomas took something that didn't belong to him. I'm just here to finish what he started." I clutched the SD card tighter in my hand, hiding it behind my back. "What do you mean?" "My husband didn't steal anything." The man tilted his head, amused. "Didn't he?" He took a slow step forward. "That recording, the one he made in the hallway? It wasn't just security footage. It was proof. Proof of a network he didn't understand." Daniel's voice was low, firm. "You mean the one exploiting the nursing home patients?" The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly. "Call it what you want. Business, maybe. Your father-in-law decided to play hero, and now people are dead because of it." My stomach turned. "You killed him," he smiled again, almost gently. "Let's not rewrite history, Mrs. Roberts. He had a weak heart. We simply gave it a little encouragement." Daniel lunged forward, but the man drew a small pistol from his coat pocket and pointed it squarely at his chest. "Easy, son," he said. "I don't like messes." My whole body trembled, but something inside me hardened. That same cold, steady fury that had carried me through every betrayal, every night of fear. "If you hurt him," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "you'll never find what you're looking for." That made him pause. His gaze shifted to me. "So you do have it." I met his eyes without flinching. "Maybe." For a long second, the room was silent except for the rain hammering the windows. Then the man chuckled. "You know, Thomas said you were smarter than you looked." Seems he was right. He lowered the gun slightly, gesturing toward the kitchen table. "Why don't we sit down? No need for this to get unpleasant." Daniel didn't move, but I placed a hand on his arm. "It's fine," I whispered. "Trust me." We sat across from the man, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself might crack. He set the gun on the table, close enough to reach, far enough to pretend civility. "You know what I want?" he said. "Give me the recording and this ends quietly." "And if I don't?" I asked. He smiled. "Then your son finds out the hard way that I'm not bluffing." Daniel's knuckles whitened on the wrench. "You won't touch her," the man sighed. "Kids and their promises." Then he looked at me again. "Margaret, this is simple. Hand it over." I forced my breathing to slow. I thought of Thomas, of his voice on that recording saying, "Check the light." He hadn't just left evidence. He'd left instructions, maybe even a plan. So I leaned back and said softly, "All right, I'll give it to you, but you'll have to follow me." His brow furrowed. "Where?" "To the basement. It's in the safe behind the tool shelf." I lied smoothly. He stared at me for a long second, then nodded. "Lead the way." We descended the basement stairs, each step creaking under our weight. Daniel followed behind me, his hand twitching near the wrench. The stranger held the gun low, but ready. When we reached the bottom, I moved toward the old tool shelf. My pulse was racing, but I remembered something Thomas had once told me when he taught me how to use the emergency circuit breaker. Electricity can't lie. "People can—" I turned to the man. "The safe's behind the shelf, but it's jammed. You'll need to help me pull it." He sighed impatiently and stepped forward. The moment he did, Daniel's eyes met mine, a single silent question. "Now?" I nodded. As the man grabbed the edge of the shelf, I reached up and flipped the breaker switch behind it. The lights flickered, and the old electric trap Thomas had wired decades ago came to life. A loud crack echoed through the basement. Sparks flew as a metal cable Thomas had once used for grounding burst with a blinding flash. The man screamed, stumbling back, his gun flying from his hand. Daniel kicked it away, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the wall. "You picked the wrong family," Daniel shouted. The man struggled, coughing, his raincoat smoking from the static discharge. "You think this ends with me?" he hissed. "There are others." You have no idea. Daniel hit him once, hard enough to knock him out cold. We stood there for a second, breathing heavily, the sound of rain muffled by the basement walls. Then Daniel looked at me. Mom, what was that? I managed a shaky laugh. Your father's backup plan. He always said if someone ever tried to steal his work, they'd get a shock of truth. Guess he wasn't kidding. Daniel smiled faintly, still trembling with adrenaline. We should call Burns, I nodded, and hand him this. I held up the tiny SD card, still clenched safely in my palm. An hour later, the sheriff's car lights flashed red and blue through the rain. Burns and 2 deputies took the unconscious man into custody. When I gave him the SD card, Burns looked at it as if holding a holy relic. This could shut down their whole operation, he said quietly. You and your husband may have just solved a case that's been buried for a decade. I looked toward the dark street where the car had disappeared. Then let's make sure Thomas didn't die for nothing. That night, Daniel and I sat by the fireplace, the house finally quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. He looked at me and said, Dad really did all this to protect us. Yes, I whispered. And I almost didn't see it. I took my phone, staring at the recent call log, Daniel's nightly calls. Are you alone, Mom? For the first time, I truly understood what those words meant. Not fear, not suspicion, protection. I smiled softly. You know, Danny, last night when you called, I lied. He frowned. Lied? I told you I wasn't alone. And it saved my life. His eyes widened, but then he smiled. The same smile his father used to have. Then I guess I'll keep calling. I laughed quietly. You'd better. Outside, the sky began to clear, stars peeking through the thinning clouds. I closed my eyes and whispered a silent thank you to Thomas for the light he left behind and for the lesson I would never forget. Sometimes, love doesn't end when someone's gone. It just keeps watching, like a guardian in the dark. The morning after felt almost unreal. I woke to sunlight streaming through the window, pale and warm, as if the storm had never happened. For a moment, I forgot about everything, the gun, the man, the recording. Then I saw Daniel asleep in the armchair, still in his clothes from last night, and it all came rushing back. The air in the house smelled faintly of smoke and rain. I got up quietly, made coffee, and stood by the window watching a police cruiser idling down the road. Sheriff Burns had promised to keep a patrol near the property for a few days. You're safe now, he'd said. But safety was a strange thing. After what I'd lived through, I wasn't sure I even knew what it meant anymore. Daniel stirred when the smell of coffee reached him. Morning, Mom, he murmured, rubbing his eyes. You sleep at all? Not much, I said softly. You? He gave a tired smile. Barely! But I kept thinking about what Dad must have gone through, how scared he must have been trying to protect us. I nodded, my throat tightening. He knew someone would come eventually. That's why he left the clues. The lights, the code, everything. Daniel took the mug I handed him and stared into it. Sheriff Burns said the guy we caught. His name's Caleb. He's part of a bigger operation. Something involving identity theft and money laundering through care facilities. The recording your husband made. It's evidence of meetings, transactions, the works. I sank into the chair across from him. All that from a simple hallway camera. He must have known he was onto something dangerous. Daniel sighed. Dad wasn't crazy after all. I smiled faintly. No, just brave. The phone rang, making us both jump. Daniel answered it quickly, listening intently before nodding. Yes, Sheriff. We'll be there. He hung up and looked at me. They want us at the station. Burns says it's time we see what's on that SD card. The police station was colder than I remembered. The walls were lined with faded posters about fraud prevention, theft, missing persons. Life's quiet tragedies written in laminated ink. Sheriff Burns greeted us with a nod, his face solemn. Come in, both of you. He led us to a small office where a computer sat ready. The SD card, our SD card, was already inserted. This, he said, is what your husband recorded before his heart gave out. He pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing a narrow hallway lit by fluorescent lights. The timestamp was from 9 months ago, the night Thomas had died. He appeared on the screen, walking slowly with a flashlight, his expression tense. Then he turned a corner, and two men came into view, arguing in hushed tones near a door marked Records Room. "This isn't enough," one of them said. "We need her files too." "The patients with joint accounts." "Relax," the other replied. "The boss said once the signatures are done, we move the funds and close the facility." Thomas stepped closer, his phone camera catching every word. Then one of the men turned and looked straight into the lens. "Hey!" The video jolted. There was a blur, a crash, Thomas running, the camera shaking violently. Then faintly, his voice whispered, "If anything happens to me, check the light." The screen froze. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Daniel's hand was clenched around mine. Sheriff Burns leaned forward. "That was the last footage your husband ever recorded. The same two men have been identified. They're tied to a ring that siphoned millions from elderly patients across the state. Caleb, your late-night visitor, was their enforcer." My chest ached. Thomas stopped them. "He really did," Burns nodded. "Because of his evidence, we've got enough to make arrests in 3 counties. He died a hero, Mrs. Roberts." For a moment I couldn't speak. All those nights I'd spent blaming him for being secretive, for worrying too much. He had been fighting for justice, and I never saw it. Daniel broke the silence. "What happens now?" "Now," Burns said, sliding the SD card into an evidence bag. "We finish what he started, and you two start living again." That night, Daniel and I returned home. The air was crisp, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel haunted. I lit a candle by Thomas's photo on the mantel. His smiling face, forever frozen in that warm afternoon light, seemed to look back at me with quiet triumph. "You were right," I whispered, "and I'm sorry I doubted you." Daniel came to stand beside me. "He'd be proud, Mom." "Of both of us," I said. We stood there in silence for a while, watching the candle flicker. Then Daniel said something that caught me off guard. "I think I'm going to move back in for a bit. Not just to keep you company, but because it feels right. Like Dad's still here somehow." Tears welled in my eyes. "You don't have to, sweetheart." "I want to," he smiled. "Besides, someone has to make sure you answer my calls honestly now." I laughed softly through my tears. "Fair enough." A few days later, the newspaper arrived. The front page headline read, "Nursing home scandal exposed. Local man's recording leads to arrests." Beneath it was a photo of Thomas and me from years ago, smiling in front of the bakery we once owned. Neighbors stopped by with flowers and casseroles. They called him a hero, said how brave he was, but what meant more to me was what they said about me. How strong you've been, how calm through it all. They didn't know that my strength came from fear, and that my calm was just exhaustion. But maybe that's how healing starts, by pretending until it becomes real. That night, as I closed the curtains, my phone buzzed. Daniel's name lit up on the screen. "Hey, Mom," he said. "You alone?" I smiled. "No, honey, not anymore." I hung up, turned off the lamp, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without fear. 3 peaceful weeks passed. The nightmares faded, replaced by the soft rhythm of morning coffee, the hum of birds outside, and the steady comfort of Daniel's presence in the house. For the first time in years, life felt gentle, predictable. I started baking again. Nothing fancy, just simple bread the way Thomas liked it. Daniel would tease, "You're trying to feed the whole town, Mom." And maybe I was. Maybe kneading dough was my way of working through grief, of reminding myself that life, like bread, needs time to rise again. One quiet afternoon, while dusting the living room, I found an unopened envelope tucked behind one of Thomas's old books. The handwriting on the front stopped my heart. It was his, to my wife, Margaret. "Open only if something happens to me." My hands trembled as I slid it open. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a small brass key. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then my fears were right. Please don't cry. I know you. You'll want to understand everything. So here's what I couldn't say aloud. The men I worked with aren't just stealing money. They're part of something bigger. They move patients' identities, create fake deaths, and sell their information. When I found out, I tried to stop them. But the man funding all this, he's powerful. Someone I thought was a friend. If anything happens to me, the truth isn't just on that recording. It's locked away in my old locker at the nursing home. Use the key. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone who says they worked with me, not even the ones who smile kindly. Love always, Thomas. The paper slipped from my fingers. A new chill ran down my spine, that same dread I thought I'd left behind. I turned the key over in my hand. It was small, heavy, and engraved with the number 47. Daniel walked in just then, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "What's that?" I handed him the letter. He read it twice, his expression tightening. "We need to tell Sheriff Burns." "I know," I whispered. "But part of me wants to see it first." Whatever Dad left there, I think he meant it for us. The next morning, we drove to the old nursing home. It had closed 2 years earlier after the scandal broke, its windows boarded, its sign half fallen. The air smelled of damp wood and memories. We parked by the side gate. Daniel forced the rusted latch open, and we stepped into a world frozen in time. Wheelchairs covered in dust, faded posters of smiling nurses, the faint echo of a place that once cared for people and then betrayed them. Locker 47 was in the maintenance wing. Daniel's flashlight cut through the darkness as we moved down the hallway. "Here," he said, stopping in front of a row of dented metal lockers. The lock on number 47 was old, but intact. I inserted the brass key, and with a soft click, it opened. Inside were 3 things: a thick manila envelope, a flash drive, and a photograph of Thomas with another man. Sharply dressed, smiling, holding what looked like a charity check. The name printed on the backdrop behind them made my stomach drop. Harrison Medical Group. Daniel frowned. "That's Senator Harrison's foundation," my voice trembled. "Thomas said someone powerful was funding it." "He meant him." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Mom, this isn't just about fraud. This could destroy people's careers." I picked up the flash drive, its plastic surface cold against my palm. "It already destroyed 1 life," I whispered. We took everything to Sheriff Burns that evening. His office was quiet, his face drawn tight as he plugged the flash drive into his computer. Files appeared on the screen, spreadsheets, medical records, bank statements. "Good God," he muttered. "These aren't just local. These tie to multiple facilities. And if these numbers are real..." He clicked on a folder labeled HMG Transfers. It opened to show wire receipts, each one signed digitally by Senator William Harrison. Daniel leaned forward. "Is this enough to charge him?" Burns nodded grimly. "It's more than enough. But this is dangerous territory. The man's untouchable, or at least he was. I'll have to take this to the state task force." I could feel my pulse in my throat. "Thomas did it," I whispered. "He uncovered everything." Burns gave me a long, respectful look. "Your husband didn't die for nothing, Mrs. Roberts. You both should be proud." Daniel exhaled shakily. "We are." That night I couldn't sleep. Rain fell softly outside, the kind of rain that seems to whisper. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared at the candle still burning by Thomas's photo. "You saved so many people," I said softly. "And somehow, even from beyond the grave, you saved me too." I thought about everything he'd done, the secrets, the recordings, the clues. He hadn't been paranoid. He'd been brave enough to fight monsters hiding behind respectable titles. For years, I'd lived in fear and confusion, wondering why my life had turned into a string of tragedies. But now the pieces fit. Thomas hadn't left me in the dark. He'd left me a map. I turned off the kitchen light and stood by the window. Across the street, the sheriff's cruiser idled, its lights faint in the rain. The town slept. The nightmare was over, but as I watched the raindrops slide down the glass, I realized something. Thomas had trusted me to finish his story, to protect his truth. Maybe that was the real reason I survived that night. Maybe that's why my son had called at the exact right moment, why I had lied and said, "No, I'm not alone," because in some strange way, I never really was. 2 weeks later, the headlines broke again. Senator Harrison resigns amid widespread investigation. Whistleblower's family receives state medal for courage. I stood at the ceremony next to Daniel, holding the medal they gave us, a small bronze circle engraved with Thomas's name. When the cameras flashed, I didn't pose. I didn't smile. I just looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it." Daniel squeezed my hand. "You ready to go home?" I nodded. "Yes, son. Let's go home." That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the stars faint behind thin clouds. The air was cool, peaceful. Daniel had gone to bed early. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key that started it all. It glinted faintly in the moonlight. I smiled and whispered, "Rest now, Thomas. It's over." And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. A year passed. The seasons changed quietly, like pages in a book being turned by a gentle breeze. The house that had once felt haunted was now warm again. The laughter of children echoed on weekends when Daniel's nieces came to visit. The air smelled of baked bread, cinnamon, and peace. Sometimes I would still catch myself listening for footsteps that never came, or glancing toward the door expecting Thomas to walk in, brushing off his coat with that sheepish smile. Grief, I'd learned, never really disappears. It just learns to walk beside you without holding your throat. The bakery was thriving again. Daniel and I reopened it together last spring, renaming it Roberts & Son. He handled deliveries and finances. I took care of the recipes. The locals loved it, not just for the pastries, but for what it stood for: resilience, justice, and the sweetness that comes after bitterness. One rainy afternoon, as I was kneading dough, a postman knocked on the door. "Certified letter for Mrs. Margaret Roberts," he said with a polite smile. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and bore the seal of the State Department of Justice. My hands trembled as I signed for it. "Mom," Daniel said, stepping out from the back room. "What is it?" I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal letter, embossed with gold at the top. "Dear Mrs. Roberts, on behalf of the Governor and the State Department of Justice, we extend our deepest gratitude for the evidence provided by your late husband, Mr. Thomas Roberts, and the continued cooperation from you and your son. The information you supplied was instrumental in dismantling a multi-state corruption network that had been operating for nearly a decade. Please find enclosed a recognition of valor and a compensation settlement approved by the court, as acknowledgement of the sacrifices your family endured." At the bottom was a signature and a check attached with a golden clip. Daniel's eyes widened. "Mom, this is—" I cut him off gently. "Not money," I said. "It's closure." That night, we sat together on the porch, just like we used to when Thomas was alive. The world outside was calm, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights and summer crickets. Daniel leaned back, sipping tea. "You ever think Dad planned this far ahead? Like he knew we'd be okay?" I smiled faintly. "Your father was always thinking ahead. Even when I thought he was being paranoid, he was really protecting us." Daniel's voice softened. "I miss him every day." "Me too," I said. "But I don't feel alone anymore. I think, in some way, he's still here." A few weeks later, something strange happened. A letter arrived, not official, not typed, but handwritten in elegant cursive. No return address. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully. "Dear Mrs. Roberts, you don't know me, but your husband once helped my mother. She was a patient at the Harrison facility. Because of his evidence, she got her pension back, and her name cleared. She lived her last year in peace, thanks to him. I wanted to tell you that heroes don't always wear uniforms or appear on TV. Sometimes they're quiet men who keep their promises, even when no one is watching. Please accept this small gift, a necklace my mother made before she passed. She said it brings luck to those who've lost someone they love. With gratitude, L. Graham." I reached inside the envelope and found a small velvet pouch. Inside it was a simple silver locket, shaped like a heart. Inside, engraved in delicate script, were the words, "Truth always finds its light." My breath caught in my throat. I clasped it around my neck and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. You still find ways to reach me." The next morning, as the bakery opened, Mrs. Peterson, my dear old neighbor, came in smiling. "Margaret, you're glowing, dear. What's your secret?" I laughed. "Peace," I said, "and maybe a little sugar." She winked. "Well, keep it up. This town needs your kind of sweetness." As the doorbell chimed behind her, I looked out the window at the sunrise. The same window I'd once stared through in fear was now my favorite view. Soft gold light spilling over the street, customers laughing as they lined up for bread. I realized something profound in that moment. The tragedy that once defined me had become the foundation of everything good that followed. Thomas's courage exposed corruption. Daniel's loyalty healed our family. My own survival, quiet, stubborn, imperfect, became a story others in town whispered about with admiration. Sometimes, at night, I'd get letters from strangers who'd read about us in the news. Widows, mothers, sons. They all said the same thing. Your story gave me courage, and I'd write back with the same words every time. Courage isn't loud. It's simply choosing to stand when life tries to break you. One evening, a familiar voice echoed from the living room. Daniel was watching an interview on TV, a reporter discussing the Harrison scandal, mentioning Thomas's name again. They called him the man who recorded justice. Daniel turned down the volume. They'll keep talking about him for years, Mom. You know that, right? I smiled softly. Good. The world needs to remember that truth still matters. He nodded and leaned back. You know, I used to think you were fragile, that all this would break you, but now, you're the strongest person I know, I chuckled. Don't give me too much credit, son. I just learned from the best. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The candle on the mantel burned low, its flame flickering against Thomas's picture. The locket around my neck felt warm, almost alive. Before heading to bed, I stood at the window one last time. The night was still, the town asleep. I closed my eyes and whispered, You can rest now, Thomas. I'll keep the light on. And as if in answer, a soft breeze brushed past my cheek, carrying with it the faint scent of his cologne. For a moment, I could almost feel him standing beside me, just as he always did, his hand gentle on my shoulder. Then the wind passed. The house was quiet again. I smiled through my tears, whispering, Good night, my love.